Hello, Faith Baptist Church family and Pastor Peace. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of your video devotion time, and I'm honored to be able to do that this morning. I just want to share a thought with you out of Second Chronicles chapter 16. I'm going to just do a little bit of reading here about this story. Second Chronicles chapter 16. In the 6th year and 13th year of the reign of Asa, Baasa king of Israel came up against Judah and built Ramah, to the intent that he might let none go out or come in to Asa king of Judah. Then Asa brought out silver and gold out of the treasure of the house of the Lord, of the king's house, and sent to Benhadad king of Syria, that dwelt at Damascus, saying, There is a league between me and thee, as there was between my father and thy father. Behold, I have sent thee silver and gold. Go break thy league with Baas, king of Israel, that he may depart from me. And Benhadad hearkened unto the king Asa, and sent the captains of his armies against the cities of Israel, and they smote Ion, and Dan, and Abel, Maam, and the store cities of Naphtali. And it came to pass, when Baas heard it, that he left off building of Ramah, and let his work cease. Then Asa, king of Judah, took all of Judah, and they carried away the stones of Ramah, and the timber thereof, wherewith Baasa was building, and he built therein Geba and Mizpah. And at that time Hananiah the seer came to Asa king of Judah, and said unto him, Because thou hast relied on the king of Syria, and not relied on the Lord thy God, therefore is the host of the king of Syria escaped out of thine hand. Were not the Ethiopians and the Lumbas a huge host, with very many chariots and horsemen? Yet because thou didst rely on the Lord, he delivered them into thine hand. This is a neat story about Asa. He had in his past a time where he trusted in the Lord. I mean, the seer just mentioned that when he went up against the Ethiopians, that he sought the Lord's help. He knew that he couldn't do it by himself, and the Lord helped him. And the seer pointed out that the Ethiopians and this other tribe of people were a much bigger threat than the king he currently dealt with. And he pointed out that at that point, he trusted God. He went into the journey needing only God and God alone. And then now comes this other king. And instead of making alliance with God, he makes alliance with another king to defeat the king of Israel. And gives him gold and whatever. And he goes and does it, and he wins. But the seer told him, because of what he did that day, the man of God said, because of what you did that day, you're always going to have war, because you chose to do it without God. You chose to do it with man's help instead of God's help. And then he shares this verse with Asa, and it was a verse that really kind of impacted me in Bible college, that caused me to dream a little bit. Here's what the verse says: For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong in the behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him. And I read that and I thought, man, if that's true, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth. We know that he's omnipresent, he can see everything. But not only that can he see everything, but when he's seeing, he's thinking, he has a plan, he's got an agenda, a path forward. When he looked down on the world in Noah's time, he wasn't just looking down there and just, to see how much evil he could see. He was also looking for somebody that would trust in him. And what he found was Noah. And man, the journey they went on. And you know what this verse says? Here's what this verse says I found interesting. For the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth, to show himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect towards him. He wants to show himself strong in my behalf. Well, how in the world could I go wrong with that? How could I go wrong with God showing himself strong on my behalf? You know? And so back to Noah. He steps out and by faith, they go on this journey. Goes home, tells his wife, we're building an ark. Can you imagine as they drew out the plans and then shared with the boys, his sons, that he got the plans from God? That God gave him the dimensions, and this thing began to rise out of the plains when they've never seen a boat this big. They don't even know what rain is, and what a incredible journey they went on. And that day, that whole time, God showed himself strong among everybody around there and in Noah's family. And then you go from there and you think about Abraham. He's looking. He has a plan. He knows one day his son is going to come to this earth and is going to die, and he needs to have his son come through. The seed of a woman. God, Jesus couldn't have an earthly dad, but he did have an earthly mom, and God set about the plan to make that happen. And Abraham being a part of that plan. When he looked at Abraham, he was thinking about his son coming through that lineage. And when he looked at Abraham, he found a man that when he said, hey, I want you to go on a journey with me, and I'm not going to tell you where, because I don't need to tell you where, because I'm God. And I can do anything. I have no limitations. I have no boundaries, whether your wife is old or whether she's young, whether there's enemies or there's not enemies. I don't have any boundaries. I just need you to trust me. And God delighted in showing himself strong on behalf of Abraham. I mean, it's great to have a baby, but how much more to do it when you're 90 years old and it's not supposed to happen, and then all that goes on through that. God gets the glory because of that. And Moses, here he is. From the day he was born, God had a great plan. Why do you think in all of these stories in the Bible that pique our interest, that cause us to understand how big God is, so that we can rely on him in our life today? If these were people who just sat on their couch, if they never had an enemy or an obstacle or a journey, if none of those things happen, we would not know as much about God as we do know. And may I say, the same thing goes on today. Now, God's not writing the Bible anymore. That's done. But he is definitely in the journey of reaching people. And if all we do is sit on our couch and play it safe, and never push ourselves or never get into a spot where we have to trust God, when what lies ahead of us is nothing but unforeseen things that we don't have the answer to, and then God steps in and does something that we can't do. I mean, that's just amazing. And that's what he was telling Asa that he was missing. He said, you started this journey with me, but then you went back to just going the route everybody else goes. You want to play it safe, because you can actually go speak to that king. You don't have to pray. And you think about Joshua. Okay, why Jericho? Why did God allow a city to get so big that the walls, you could ride 2 chariots across the top of it? Why did God let that happen? Because he wanted to knock it down. And he wanted to knock it down with the children of Israel. That's why. Now, they wanted to play it safe. They wanted the leeks and the garlics and the mundane life. Listen, guys, we're made to live. I mean, the minds that God has given us, the ability of humanity. Why is it that lost people can go to the moon, but Christians can't go next door and knock on the door and tell somebody about the Lord? Why is it lost people can do things that that boggle our minds, and in Christianity, who serves a God that can do anything, often are the ones that don't dream. Every ministry out there, every missionary, every pastor that has impacted people has had a dream or a vision that God put in his heart. whether it was a Bible college or planning a church or taking a church and seeing what it could be and what God could do. And you said about reaching the youth and evangelizing your community. All of those things you have to be able to see past a certain point and look into what God can do with our meager efforts if we'll just let Him. Goes on, and you think about David. Again, each one of these stories, involves something that would normally make people go the other way. A 10-foot giant out there blaspheming God. Half the Sunday morning crowd, they're staying home for that one. They're not going to come. Tell them there's a 10-foot giant going to show up at church that day. They're out. But man, David showed up. And when he heard that giant blaspheme God, he thought about not what he could do to that giant, but what God could do to that giant. That's what he thought. And he walked out there with that sling and he said, God's going to deliver you into my hand. No, making it very clear, he wasn't going to do that. God was going to do that. So we're right in the middle of this coronavirus thing. And it has no doubt shaped people. Every pastor out there, every church member, we have something that other people don't have. Nobody has ever pastored a church through COVID-19. It's never happened. Nobody's ever pastored a church in this generation where society as a whole has been really impacted across the whole world. People had to change their lives, and we're still doing this right now. And what does it look like? Well, the way forward is definitely uncertain, to say the least. The way forward definitely has major challenges. The way forward has risk involved in it. What if this thing never goes away? Well, then we're going to have to make a decision. Of how this is going to affect the church and how this is going to affect people and what we're going to do. Do we quit going to the mission field? Do we give up on the Great Commission? Is it just time to put it in neutral and coast until we hit the trumpet? Or is it time to walk out there and look to heaven and say, God, if that's true, what you said in 2 Chronicles 16, that your eyes go to and fro to the earth, looking for somebody that you can show yourself strong on their behalf? And wouldn't it be great if God heard all across this country people saying, Lord, I'm in. If you're looking for somebody to do something, if you still got a dream, if you still want to reach the world with the gospel, if you are still doing something, then I want to be a part of that. Let me end with this. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Just let me find it really quick here. I think maybe I even have it marked. 2 Corinthians, I do. 2 Corinthians chapter 11. And I want to read here in verse 23, as Paul's kind of given a recap of his ministry. It says this: Are they ministers of Christ? I speak as a fool. I labor more abundant, in stripes above measure, in prison more frequent, in death often. So at the beginning of this, while he's talking about some things that he's done, listen to what he says. He says, in stripes above measure. So you're sitting down with the Apostle Paul. He said he's been whipped so many times. It's hard for him to count. Paul, how many times have you been whipped for preaching? He'd say, man, I don't know, I lost count. Can you tell me about some of those times, the Apostle Paul? And you know what he would do? He'd begin to tell you a story. A story about how God laid a burden on his heart to go to a certain town. He'll tell you the events that happened that day, how they were captured. He would talk about who beat him, how many times, and then he would talk about how God delivered him out of that. And then not only was he in stripes, but it also says this. It says in prisons more frequent and deaths odd. Paul, how many times you were in prison? Frequently. I had a frequent flyer pass for the prisons. And each one of those prison times he was in jail, there was a story behind it. Paul, how many times did you think you were going to die? How many times did you think that was it? You're going to go see Jesus? And he'd tell you another story. And then it go on down here. It said this: thrice I was beaten with rods. 3 times. So there's 3 different stories he could tell you about being beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. That was, not only was he stoned, but he left the earth into the third heaven. And we got a really cool story out of that one. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. Not one shipwreck story. He could tell you 3 of them. 3 of them about not only about the events that happened, but the events that delivered him. Now think about this. When I read the Apostle Paul, it motivates me. But it wouldn't have if there's no stripes, if there's no prisons, if he's just sitting on the couch back home and saying, well, it's way too dangerous out there. There's too many things that can go wrong out there. You can die out there. I'm just gonna play it safe. I'm just gonna stay close to my family. I'm just gonna build little walls around me, and hunker in until Jesus comes. That's not what Paul did. And by the way, we wouldn't have got 2/3 of the New Testament written had he done that. Goes on to say this: thrice was I beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Thrice I suffered shipwreck. A night and a day I've been in the deep. In journeyings often, and perils of waters, and perils of robbers. He was robbed. He could tell you about that. And perils of my own countrymen, perils by the heathen, and perils in the city, and perils in the wilderness, and perils in the sea, and perils among false brethren, and weariness, and painfulness, and watchings often, and hunger, and thirst, and fastings often, cold and nakedness. Besides those things which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. And he just talks about what happened in his life. And then we know that when he went home to meet the Lord, he was ready. Man, Paul had a story. Maybe it's something like Paul, or maybe it's just being faithful in your local town. God still wants him to show himself strong. It doesn't always involve a shipwreck, but it does involve trusting him. And there will be times when God presents something to you, maybe a mission trip. Many people, they honestly think that taking a mission trip may be the end of their life. Just the opposite. It's the beginning of an incredible journey. Whatever it is, there will always be times when you're apprehensive and don't know where that road is going to be. But if it is something that God is involved in, you want to be a part of that. Because if you don't, you miss out on the story. Life's too precious, guys. I've seen people with cancer fight for every day they have. They go to chemo, poison pumped in their body, throw up all day long, just for one more day with their family. And I have my health. And God's blessed me beyond measure. It is not fair for me to play it safe. It's not fair for me to take what God's given me and just wrap it up. Life's meant to be lived. And furthermore, I got somebody that lives it with me. And he can do anything. So, would you be willing to pray this today? Would you be willing to pray that verse in 2 Chronicles? And just take God up on his word. God, if it's true that you're looking to and fro the earth, seeking somebody to show yourself strong, Lord, I want to be that person. Let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for just being able to open the Bible and share a little bit this morning. And thank you for helping us dream. And Lord, I thank you for sharing this verse with us that I've held on to for a long time. These are unique times in our country, and you still are wanting to do things. I pray that you would help us as we follow you. We ask this in your precious name. Amen. And thanks for letting me share with you. Take care.